A very good morning, dear colleagues. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you this morning, albeit in hybrid mode, to present a brief introduction to GLOF risk management in the context of a rapidly changing mountain environment. So what are these glacial lake outburst floods, or GLOFs as you'll hear them referred to? Essentially, this is the catastrophic release of any lake water that has been trapped in the glacial system. Some of the most dangerous cases relate to so-called proglacial lakes at the front of a glacier, but we also see ice-dammed lakes at the side of a glacier. We can have lakes forming underneath the glacier or at the surface. Now, climate change obviously has a strong role in driving the formation of glacial lakes as the glaciers retreat, but we also see a climate change signal in a lot of the triggering processes of these GLOF events. So for instance, extreme rainfall or snow melt can overwhelm the size of a lake, or we often see landslides, rockfalls, or avalanches falling into the lake and then creating like a tsunami effect. So a clear climate change signal in some of these processes. GLOFs occur all across the glaciated mountain regions of the world, but in terms of hotspots of GLOF exposure or risk, we particularly talk about high mountain Asia and also the Andes. Now, one key characteristics of GLOFs is the fact that they tend to mobilize a whole heap of loose sediment and debris, and so therefore we often see GLOF events transforming into far-reaching mud flow or debris flow events that go on to impact far downstream from the glacial environment. So I think these pictures paint more than 1,000 words. You can clearly see some of the devastating impacts that past GLOF events have had on infrastructure and communities. Just to put some numbers to some of these recent events, so the Kedarnath disaster in northern India in 2013, more than 1,000 fatalities, huge losses in terms of impacts to roading, bridges, and hydropower. But significantly in this event, we saw an impact on the tourism sector as the pilgrim routes were wiped out for up to 2 years, with an associated loss to the tourism sector of up to 200 million US dollars. Last year in the Teesta Basin in Sikkim, again in India, we saw once more the complete destruction of a hydropower dam, so a 1200 megawatt hydropower station at Chungtung, and again more than 90 fatalities in this event. Earlier this year in Tame in Nepal, fortunately no lives lost in this disaster, but again huge impacts on the community, up to 135 local people displaced, and the obvious social and cultural impacts associated with that. As we look to the future, we know with some certainty that the glaciers are going to continue to retreat, and as they do so, they will uncover depressions in the glacier bed, and this is where new lakes will develop as the glaciers retreat. So with a high degree of confidence, we know that the number and size of glacial lakes is going to continue to increase over the 21st century. Just one example from one study here, we know as an average across high mountain Asia, by the end of the 21st century, under warming or emission scenario RCP 8.5, we'll see something like a threefold increase in GLOF risk across that region, with some spatial variation. So some parts of high mountain Asia, particularly Western Himalaya and into Pamir, we'll see risk levels increase even further. But we mustn't forget that new lakes, as well as being a threat, also bring opportunities, particularly for hydropower, but also for water for use for agriculture, for pastoral land, etc. But if we are going to safely exploit these opportunities, we of course have to manage the associated risks with these glacial lakes. So that brings me to the core of today's event, today's discussion, and I want to present here work that my colleague Lara Nigley has led at Zurich University, where she's undertaken a really comprehensive assessment of more than 100 GLOF risk reduction strategies globally. And what we see from her study is that there is a diverse range of risk reduction solutions employed, from those that really target the reduction of GLOF hazard, so up at the lake itself, down to those solutions or activities that are aiming to reduce underlying societal exposure and vulnerability. These solutions can be both short-term or long-term investments, and they can include structural or engineering solutions, or the so-called soft or non-structural solutions. Just to show some examples, so here in terms of reducing GLOF hazard, one of the main goals here is often to reduce the size or volume of the glacial lake, so we can do that through siphoning or pumping of the lake water. A longer term solution to reduce the GLOF hazard is to actually stabilize the dam structure, the lake dam, concrete and bricks and mortar to try and stabilize that dam. Or again, over the longer term, aiming to cut a new channel or maintain a stable existing drainage channel out of the lake so that the lake level can never reach a dangerous situation. Now moving further down the valley, where efforts are aiming to reduce the exposure of the population. Obviously, in the short term, this can be the evacuation of communities, so in response to an early warning or imminent risk. But equally important are the long-term efforts to reduce societal exposure. So particularly here, we're talking about spatial planning based on robust GLOF hazard and risk modeling. So this enables us, for instance, to make sure critical infrastructure such as schools, medical centers, emergency shelters are located out of the red zone or out of the high risk locations. And then lastly, the diverse range of activities which are aiming to reduce underlying societal vulnerabilities to GLOFs. So this is all about capacity building, establishing new information and data, strengthening institutions so that they have the capabilities to prepare and respond to GLOFs, but also this includes the recovery and response efforts and things like diversifying the economic opportunities for the communities so that if a GLOF occurs, if it destroys the crops or farmland, they have other forms of livelihood to sustain them. And I want to touch briefly on early warning systems because we really see these as a key cross-cutting solution to reduce GLOF risk. Because on the one hand, an early warning system includes all the risk knowledge, so all the hazard and risk modeling that goes into the design of the early warning system. Then, of course, the technical components, so the monitoring stations, the sensors, etc. And then all the efforts to reduce underlying societal vulnerabilities, so building up the capacities, the capabilities, so that communities can respond to a GLOF event. And then what we call the last mile, so making sure that the alert gets to those members of the community that need it the most, particularly the most vulnerable and marginalized members of communities. So just to remind that a GLOF early warning system is far more than just the monitoring or technical component. They are highly complex cross-cutting systems, but very effective. But yeah, needing to include all these technical components, the institutional, social, and legal aspects as well. And with that, I just want to leave you with 5 key principles that have emerged from this global stocktake on GLOF disaster risk reduction strategies. Firstly, it's absolutely clear that effective GLOF risk reduction requires solutions that go well beyond simply the reduction of GLOF hazard, but bringing in all these other activities aiming to reduce underlying societal exposure and vulnerabilities. In a similar way, GLOF risk reduction needs to be viewed through the broad multi-hazard risk reduction framework, recognizing all the co-benefits, all the synergies that exist between activities aiming to reduce GLOF risk on the one hand, but also reducing the risk of other climate-related threats such as landslides or floods. We know that strong coordination between all stakeholders is absolutely crucial. That includes academia, private companies, government authorities, and that stable governance is absolutely key to sustainable GLOF risk management. Perhaps most important is the need to incorporate local knowledge and appropriate the risk reduction strategies to the socio-economic context where we are working. We know that many GLOF risk reduction strategies have been implemented in a top-down way and often have not proven sustainable. So we really call for co-production of GLOF risk strategies in a bottom-up approach with local communities. And lastly, even with the best availability and implementation of solutions that we have, we know some GLOF risk will remain, particularly threatening infrastructure. So therefore, there needs to be focus on the financial solutions, those solutions that can transfer the risk. So here we talk about solutions such as insurance markets, etc. And with that, I just want to thank you very much for your attention. I trust that this short introduction has provided a useful basis for the talks that will follow, and I welcome any feedback or discussion by email over the coming days or weeks. Thank you very much.